one book produced by an Asian American, it would be this book.
In World War II, solely because of their race, Japanese Americans endured expulsion from their homes, 4 years in American concentration camps, and a return to broken communities. Yet no post-war literature gave voice to their quiet anger at unjust imprisonment. In the 1950s, John Okada decides he must write that book.
He felt it was up to him to tell that story. It's a remarkable decision for somebody to say, you know, I think I'll write a novel about Japanese America, and I don't know of another Japanese American work out there, but I'm going to write this. I'm going to write this novel.
This book is about what an American is and what America is. So it's a story about building that larger, more encompassing America.
I think that there he is,
right
John
here.
Okada. 1943 MIS.
Yes, that's it.
Panel 4B 090.
090. I just wondered why my father never brought the book up when we were growing up. He never discussed it. He never mentioned it. Not once.
He never really discussed that background with me, him being a Japanese American and having spent time in the internment camps.
I think most people know more about my father than I do. And I think because they research and research.
John Okada was born in Seattle, a Nisei, or second-generation Japanese American. Friends remember his bright, shining eyes. Others believe he felt inferior, possibly due to his short stature. He is just starting the University of Washington when all persons of Japanese ancestry on the West Coast are rounded up and incarcerated. The Okadas sent to the camp at Minidoka, Idaho. The government demands answers to 2 questions on a loyalty oath. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States wherever ordered? And will you forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor? Young men who defy the government are branded no-no boys.
There was probably some that were eligible for the draft, but refused to answer yes to both questions because of the injustice that was involved.
Okada answers by enlisting in the Army Air Force. He volunteers to fly dangerous missions over Japanese-held islands, translating intercepted radio messages. But the novel he writes after the war centers on a young man who refuses to be drafted from camp, Ichiro Yamada, returning home.
2 weeks after his 25th birthday, Ichiro got off a bus at 2nd and Main in Seattle. He had been gone 4 years, 2 in camp and 2 in prison. Walking down the street that autumn morning with a small black suitcase, he felt like an intruder in a world to which he had no claim.
Ichiro is sort of the conscience of the community. You know, he made a decision, and he made it a very personal decision. He could have gotten out of the draft by a physical condition, but he didn't choose that route. He chose to stand up for what he really believed in, and he believed that volunteering for the draft when a country has taken away his civil rights is wrong, and so he chose to go to prison.
The government stripped us of our constitutional rights, reclassified us as enemy aliens, and put us in camp, and now they needed more men. They imposed a draft into the camps, and the draft registers thought that that was wrong.
And I just couldn't see myself, you know, going along with that.
The sentence for refusing to go was 3 years, 3 months, and a $200 fine.
They told me that there's a chance that I may get killed or beat up you know, if I go to jail. We were going to be put into a federal penitentiary where there's a lot of pretty rough character. So I tell him that's a chance I'm taking.
Christ, he thought to himself, just a goddamn kid is all I was. Didn't know enough to wipe my own nose. What the hell have I done? What am I doing back here? Best thing I can do would be to kill some son of a bitch and head back to prison.
I don't know for sure, but my understanding the book was based on Jim Akutsu, who resisted from Minidoka.
Well, actually, if you read the No No Boy, some of that did happen.
Ichi! That was his nickname. Hey, Ichi! The caller's footsteps ran toward him.
He's changed. The things that Japanese Americans believe in have changed and become hard-edged. He's the no-no boy and he runs into the vet, right? And so the lines are drawn.
When you get discharged? That is, I never was in. Eto slapped him good-naturedly on the arm. No need to look sour, so you weren't in, so what? Been in camp all this time? No. He made an effort to be free of Eto with his questions. He felt as if he were in a small room whose walls were slowly closing in on him. I've really got to be going. The round face wasn't smiling anymore. It was thoughtful. The eyes confronted Ichiro with indecision, which changed slowly to enlightenment and then to suspicion. He remembered. No boy, huh? Rotten, no good bastard. I'll piss on you the next time.
He's not writing only about a draft resistor. This no-no boy is emblematic of all Japanese Americans who felt that this history of theirs somehow not just tainted them, but made them less than or other than American.
And it's interesting that, at least in my experience, after camp was really difficult too, because in a sense we re-immigrated to America from camp, and we had to adjust to this society that had changed because of the war, and we always had this feeling of having snuck back into America.
Because all of Japanese America was punished, it means that they must have done something wrong. So it's kind of a backwards logic. Because I was punished, I must have done wrong. What did I do wrong? And that's Ichiro's question. And of course, the answer was, you were born the wrong race.
My father had lost everything. All the people that had Japanese hotels that, in my father's area, they all had to sell their business. And they had to sell at a time where no one wanted to buy.
And for most, it was a complete economic disaster, losing all that the Issei had worked, the first generation had worked, all those many decades, and that level of comfort that they thought that they would finally have in their retirement completely wiped out.
Okada feels an urgency to capture the Japanese American experience. He says, I should regret if their chapter in American history should die with them. Only in fiction can the hopes and fears and joys and sorrows of a people be adequately recorded. One piece of the story falls into place at his father's new hotel. He meets Jim Akutsu, a draft resistor, who lives in back of his father's shoe repair shop.
John would ask my brother Jim what was his reason, and anything to do with the reason why he had refused to go to the service.
We do know that John Okada sat in Jim Akutsu's shoe repair shop and listened to stories from his contemporaries, and he put these stories in his book.
There's so much misunderstanding, that's going on. And number one, that's a misunderstanding between the resistors and the non-resistors, including the vets.
So it was no sooner he came out of the federal penitentiary that he was confronted with a number of people, and they threatened to beat him up and all that.
There's a false sense that the government seems to have imposed on the community that there are loyals and disloyals, and there's only one path to this loyalty. So many veterans tell me how many of their friends did not return. And in their minds, someone that did not serve resisted were one and the same with cowards that could have served, and maybe their friends would be alive.
In New York for graduate school, Okada meets a minister's daughter. They return to Seattle to start a family. Seattle provides Okada with the setting for his novel, but he leaves his job at the public library for a better one in Detroit.
Sometime in the 1950s, he did mention that he was writing a book. He wouldn't mention any details.
He complains of a lack of time to write. He takes a job as a technical writer for the Chrysler Missile Program. Perhaps, he says, I have been endowed with a larger capacity for normalcy than most people.
I never said anything to him when he was writing. I just left him alone. I didn't ask John, do that for me, John, carry that for me, John, this. I never, ever said that. He said, oh, I finished. That's all that he said. I remember that very well. Oh, I finished. That's what he said.
But America in the 50s has no interest in hearing about Japanese Americans or the consequences of wartime incarceration.
Published the first, and then you wonder, are these people going to buy this book? It's just realistic. He had to try to shop this around, and of course the other publishers, they didn't know what to do about it.
Okada can only find a publisher in Japan who specializes in books to span the East and West. His novel appears in 1957 with the title No-No Boy, the term of scorn for those who refused the government's loyalty oath and were sent to the Tule Lake segregation camp in Northern California. But Ichiro is a draft resister like the Yakutsus, who served 2 years at the federal prison on McNeil Island, south of Seattle.
The No-No Boy title is misleading because the main character is not a No-No Boy, he's a resistor. Maybe makes a better sounding title.
A reviewer calls Okada a writer of promise, saying, perhaps here at last is the man who will write the great Nisei novel. But the book does not sell.
The book No-No Boy was not well received by many in the Japanese American community because it raised that question of the resistors. And I think that they were also thinking that things had stabilized for Japanese Americans in the post-war period, and there was more, quote-unquote, acceptance of Japanese Americans. And if you raise the issue of no-no boys or resistors, then maybe Americans reading this book would think that Japanese Americans were disloyal.
When I first read it, I got so disgusted with the first part of it that I didn't complete it.
I'll piss on you next time.
All the resistors that I know would never have reacted the way Ichiro in his novel reacted. I think any of our resistors would have probably hauled up and smacked him.
He walked toward the railroad depot where the tower with the clocks on all four sides was. It was a dirty-looking tower of ancient brick. It was a dirty city, dirtier certainly than it had a right to be after only 4 years.
The feelings that come out of the book, it it goes right through you. You don't, it's like a hard, getting hit hard with a feeling, and you really feel them. I just wonder where he got all that from.
December the 7th of the year 1941 was the day when the Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. 2 years later, a good Japanese American who had volunteered for the Army sat smoking in the belly of a B-24 on his way back to Guam from a reconnaissance flight to Japan. His job was to listen through his earphones and jot down air-ground messages spoken by Japanese in Japanese planes and in Japanese radio shacks. The lieutenant who operated the radar detection equipment was a blond giant from Nebraska. The lieutenant from Nebraska said, "Where are you from?" The Japanese American, who was an American soldier, answered, "No place in particular." "You got folks?" "Yeah, I got folks." "Where at?" "Wyoming, out in the desert." "Farmers, huh?" "Not quite." "What's that mean?" "Well, it's this way." And then the Japanese American, whose folks were still Japanese, or else they would not be in a camp with barbed wire and watchtowers with soldiers holding rifles, told the blond giant from Nebraska about the removal of the Japanese from the coast, which was called the evacuation, and about the concentration camps, which were called relocation centers. The lieutenant listened and he didn't believe it. He said, "That's funny. Now tell me again." The Japanese American soldier of the American Army told it again and didn't change a word. The lieutenant believed him this time. "Hell's bells," he exclaimed. "If they'd have done that to me, they could kiss my ass." "I got reasons," said the Japanese American soldier soberly.
It's a hard book for me to read. There's a part where he talks about his mother, and I feel like the hatred that he feels for his mother, it's very hard to read. And usually I put down the book when I get to that point and stop for a while. And I wondered if maybe he felt that way about his own mother.
Word has been brought to us that the victorious Japanese government is presently making preparations to send ships which will return to Japan those residents in foreign countries who have steadfastly maintained their faith and loyalty to our emperor.
"No," he said to himself. "There was a time when I was your son. There was a time that I no longer remember when you used to smile a mother's smile and tell me stories. And we were Japanese with Japanese feelings and Japanese pride and Japanese thoughts, even if we lived in America. Then there came a time when I was only half Japanese, because one is not born in America and raised in America and taught in America without becoming American and loving it. But I did not love enough, for you were still half my mother, and I was thereby still half Japanese.
The day of glory is close at hand. The rewards will be beyond our greatest expectations.
The mother is believing somehow Japan has won. This is not the mother that he had left. So obviously, in the ensuing years, it's the whole wartime incarceration has driven her crazy.
In fiction, the mother's spirit is broken, and she despairs. In life, the mothers of soldiers who fought and died in the war close ranks to shun the mother of the draft resistor.
I believe that my mother suffered because for the stand I took. She got ostracized. She got cut away from the Issei community, and the last thing that happened was she was told to not come to church anymore. So she told me I can't even go to church. And it was shortly thereafter she took her life.
Having captured the turmoil of the Nisei, Okada has in mind a new book about the Issei, the immigrant first generation. He knows how it will start. A ship docks in the harbor. A man jumps overboard and swims ashore, then searches for soy sauce casks on display. A sign he will find fellow immigrants to take him in. But before he can finish the book, John Okada dies of a heart attack in 1971. Only months later, a new generation of Asian American writers discovers No-No Boy. They look up Okada's widow.
We asked, of course, about the novel that Okada had written but not published, and she informed us that she had offered these papers to UCLA, all of his papers, but UCLA had never heard of him. And so she burned all of his papers. And as writers, I remember we were sitting there looking at her, stunned that you would burn somebody's creative work.
The young writers campaigned to bring No-No Boy back into print.
The University of Washington Press turned us down and then made us a curious offer, saying, well, if you give us $5,000, we'll publish it for you. And the four of us were not MBA geniuses when we realized that, we could give ourselves $5,000 and publish this book.
They pool their money and sell a paperback edition entirely by mail. The war in Vietnam and the rise of Asian American studies create an audience ready for a story about an outcast.
When they first proposed it, we had no idea of its significance. We had no real context for it. Sean told us that he was wrapping and shipping the book from his own basement in Seattle, trying to keep up with the demand for it. We gradually became aware of its significance, and so we decided to go ahead and print our own edition. And of course, we've been very glad that we did.
I think I don't really understand what it is about the book that it stays with people for 30 or 40 years. I want to get to that point. But it seems like once people read the book, they can't forget it.